Lesson 15. Sleeping Beauty. Once upon a time, there lived a king and a queen who longed for a baby. One day, when the queen was bathing in the lake, a frog jumped out of the water on the shore and said, "Before the end of the year, your wish will be granted and you will give birth to a daughter." What the frog had predicted came true, and the queen gave birth to a baby girl who was so beautiful that the king decided to hold a lavish christening. Not only he invited his relatives and friends, but also the 12 good fairies who lived in his kingdom. However, there were in fact 13 fairies. But the king had forgotten about the 13th as she lived all alone in a faraway castle, and so she was not invited. What a mistake that turned out to be, as the king and queen all too soon found out. The christening was a very grand celebration, and when it was nearly over, the good fairies, one by one, went up to baby's cradle to bestow a gift upon her. One gave her the gift of virtue, another beauty, another wealth, and soon the baby princess had everything that one could ever wish for. When the 11th fairy had just bestowed her gift on the baby, the 13th fairy, furious at not having been invited, entered the room. "I am going to give the princess a gift which will never allow you to forget me again," she said, and without greeting anyone, she cried, "On her 16th birthday, the princess will prick herself on a spindle and will die," and she left. The whole gathering was dumb with horror at this terrible gift. Then the 12th good fairy stepped forward, as she still had to make her wish for the baby princess. She did not possess the power to finish the wicked curse, but she could ease it and change it. She said, "Don't worry. Although I can't finish the curse, but I can change it. The princess will not die, but fall into a deep sleep for 100 years when she pricks her finger on the spindle." The king ordered that all the spindles in the kingdom must be burned, as he still hoped to save his daughter from the wicked spell. How he regretted at having not invited the 13th fairy. The years flew by, and the princess grew up to be very beautiful and kind. She was loved by everyone. On her 16th birthday, the king and queen had to go away for a part of the day and would not return until the evening to celebrate their daughter's birthday. So the princess was all alone in the palace for most of the day. She wandered all over the palace, discovering all sorts of rooms and chambers she had never been in before. Finally, she came across a narrow winding staircase that led to the tower. She climbed up the staircase and reached a little door with a rusty key in the lock. When she turned it, the door opened, and in the room sat an old woman busily spinning flax at a spindle. The old woman looked up as the door opened. "Hello, old lady," said the princess. "What are you doing?" "I am spinning yarn," replied the old woman. "What is that thing that is jumping up and down?" asked the princess. "That's spindle," replied the old woman. "Would you like to have a go?" The princess took the spindle and began to spin. But as soon as she touched the spindle, she pricked her finger and fell into a deep sleep. The rest of the royal household fell asleep too. The king and the queen, who had just returned home, fell asleep in their room. The horses slept in the stables, the dogs in the courtyard, the pigeons on the roofs, and the flies on the walls. Even the fire in the oven died down, and the cook, who was just about to pull the kitchen boy's ear, fell asleep. The wind stopped, and soon not a single leaf rustled. Everybody and everything slept peacefully. A hedge of thorns grew up around the palace, completely surrounding it. Year by year, the hedge grew thicker and higher, and eventually the flag on the palace roof could no longer be seen. The story of Sleeping Beauty, that is our princess, became a legend in the country. From time to time, princes from faraway kingdoms would come and try to force their way through the thick hedge of thorns and vines. But they found it impossible to cut down the thorns, and so they gave up to search for Sleeping Beauty and returned to their kingdoms. When the 100 years were almost up, a prince came to the kingdom and heard the story of Sleeping Beauty in the palace hidden behind the hedge of thorns. He also knew that many princes had already tried to reach the Sleeping Beauty, but had failed. But this did not put the prince off, and he said, "I want to go and find the lovely Sleeping Beauty for myself." So the prince rode off to find the princess. As he arrived at the hedge of thorns, a mysterious thing happened. He was about to start cutting the vines down when suddenly a path opened up for the prince, and he was able to ride straight up to the palace, but the thorns then closed up behind him to form the hedge once more. He saw the horses and the dogs asleep in the courtyard. He noticed the pigeons were also asleep on the roofs with their heads tucked into their wings. When he went into the palace, he saw the flies asleep on the walls, the cook in the kitchen, and the kitchen maid were sound asleep. Then the prince walked on and saw the rest of the household still fast asleep. On the throne, the king and the queen were fast asleep. The prince continued along the corridors of the palace in search of the beautiful princess. His footsteps echoed in the silent passageways. Eventually, he came to the tower and opened the door of the little room where the princess lay sleeping. She looked so beautiful that he could not take his eyes off her and bent down to kiss her on the lips. As soon as his lips touched hers, Sleeping Princess awoke and fell in love with the prince at first sight. The rest of the palace then awoke from the long sleep. The horses in the courtyard awoke and yawned. The pigeons on the roofs awoke and pulled their little heads out from their wings and flew off. The fire in the kitchen flared up and continued to cook the dinner. The cook pulled the boy's ears and made him scream. It was almost as though time had stood still and those long, long years had never passed. Soon after everyone had woken up, a magnificent wedding reception was planned for the prince and Sleeping Beauty's marriage, which took place on a bright summer's morning. They lived happily ever after, and no one ever saw or heard of that 13